welcome back to the Job Site, Soul Fam. I'm Max Soul.
And I'm Mello Soul.
And we're opening up the blueprints for Season 2, Episode 12. And today, we're deconstructing a woman who built a skyscraper out of silken steel. She didn't just sing songs, she staged them. We're talking about the incomparable Nancy Wilson.
That's the ticket today, Max. If Lou Rawls was the king of the urban narrative,
Yeah, buddy.
Nancy was the undisputed queen of controlled elegance. But look, the most important brick in her foundation was her brand rebellion. In an industry that wanted to box her in as a jazz singer or a blues shouter, she drew a line in the sand. She coined the term song stylist.
Indeed, she did, Mello. To understand how Nancy Wilson became the architect of the song style, well, we have to take a look at a 15-year-old girl in Columbus, Ohio, who decided to build her own zoning laws before she even had a driver's license. She didn't just stumble into sophistication. She engineered it to survive the shout culture of the 1950s. Nancy's career didn't start in a club, Mello. It started on the airwaves. At just 15, she won a local talent contest in Columbus, and the prize wasn't a trophy. It was her own television show, Skyline Melodies. How about that?
Yeah, no, that is pretty cool, Max. That's definitely some prize.
Yes, it sure is, Mello. This is a new paradigm for an architect. Not just a trophy, but your own show. I mean, that's pretty damn impressive.
It is, Max, most definitely. And because she started on TV, she learned the technical specs of the camera before the grid of the club. She realized that on screen, a shout looked distorted and aggressive, but a style looked intimate and regal.
And Mello, right there and then, she made a decision. She saw how the camera rewarded subtlety. This was her first brick in her decision to be a stylist rather than a shouter. And if you want to know who gave Nancy that source code and gave her the whisper and the clip delay technique, well, you have to look at little Jimmy Scott. He was a tremendous veteran vocalist who I was lucky enough to get to see. And he was one of the most innovative soul and jazz singers of his time. I never saw anything like the way this guy sang.
Oh, that's correct, Max. Jimmy Scott was a fellow Ohioan with a countertenor voice and a way of singing behind the beat that created an almost unbearable tension.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. He was the primary source code for that technique. While most singers in the 1950s were trying to keep up with the big band swing, Jimmy Scott was treating time like it was made of rubber.
Yeah, it surely was amazing, his ear for his time and his timbre, Mello. I mean, and Nancy didn't just listen to him, she dissected him. She realized that Jimmy's hallmark wasn't just a quirk of vocals. It was a technical innovation in phrasing. Now, Jimmy Scott had a unique physiological condition called Kallman syndrome that kept his voice in a high ethereal range. But his genius, and I mean his real genius, was in his metric rebellion. He sang so far behind the beat that he sometimes sounded like he was in a different zip code than the drummer.
He had elastic timing.
I
Max.
swear it was.
Yeah, I swear Jimmy would wait until the very last millisecond of a measure to start a sentence.
That's right. So we're going to dig down on this for a second to get my muso cap on. So to explain the clip and delay technique, we got to look at the physics of phrasing. So Nancy Wilson didn't just sing a melody. She manipulated the time and texture of the words to create a psychological tug-of-war with the listener.
So, Max, if most singers are like a river flowing smoothly over rocks, Nancy was like a master mason, placing each word with a specific gap or sharp edge to force the audience to pay attention to the structure.
Exactly, Mello. Because the clip is about consonant architecture. Most singers let the vowels ring out until the next note starts. Nancy did the opposite. She would cut the air off abruptly at the end of a word. She would emphasize the hard consonants, the T's, the K's, and the P's.
So instead of saying heart, Max, she would say heart.
Be very sibilant.
Yeah, with a sharp percussive stop. This created a micro silence, that tiny gap of silence that acts like a frame around the word, making it pop out of the mix.
Yes, that's a sibilance, and sibilance makes you hear that stuff.
For the Nouveau peers, this is how you create attitude without having to growl or shout.
The delay is about metric tension, Soul Fam, and this is the Jimmy Scott influence. Nancy would often start her phrases a microsecond after the downbeat, or stretch a syllable so it sat behind the snare drum. So while the band is playing strict 4/4 time, Nancy's singing in that lazy behind the beat elastic time as Jimmy exemplifies. So she just stayed behind the pocket.
And the effect it creates, well, Soul Fam, it is a feeling of sophisticated nonchalance, and it sounds like she's so in control of the song that she isn't worried about catching up to the band.
Oh, no, she's not worried about that. And the why of why she did this is simple. Nancy saw that it forces the listener to lean in. When the voice is slightly behind the beat, the human ear instinctively waits for it, creating a magnetic pull towards the vocal. And because of Jimmy's late start, Mello, Jimmy Scott had to clip the words at the end of it to fit the thought into the musical bar. Wow, that's pretty crazy. Mm-hmm. Nancy saw that Jimmy style created a suspension of gravity. By adopting his clip and delay strategy, she could take a standard pop song and give it the weight of a deep dramatic monologue.
So now Nancy starts to figure out how to industrialize this. While Jimmy Scott's style was raw and often heartbreaking, Nancy Wilson took that source code, Jimmy Scott's clip and delay, and refined it for the high-end market.
Yeah, she was schooling herself, Mello, and enunciation was key as an asset. Jimmy was often breathy. So Nancy took his timing, but added Dinah Washington's surgical enunciation. So she wanted the delay, but she wanted every clip to be crystal clear. Noticing that Jimmy used his breath as a rhythmic instrument, so she began to incorporate those sharp, rhythmic intakes of breath, the hiccups, that Michael Jackson would later turn into a global trademark.
Yeah, Jimmy Scott taught Nancy that the band follows the vocalist, not the other way around. She realized that if she delayed the phrase, the band had to hold the space for her.
Definitely.
Yeah, it shifted the power dynamic from the conductor to the stylist. In other words, she had control of the pocket now.
She sure did, Mello. Nancy watched Jimmy and realized that space is a structural material. Jimmy taught her that you don't have to fill every second with noise. If you style the silence, the audience has to hold their breath. And she famously said, I don't want to be a jazz singer because jazz singers improvise too much and lost the lyric. I wanted to be like Jimmy. I wanted to tell the story. How fucking cool is that?
And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about her Chitlin Circuit audit when she got tossed in the fray with Rusty Bryant's band.
Yep, stay with us, Soul Fam. You're listening to Max and Mello's Architects of Soul, and we'll be right back.
And you're back with us on Architects of Soul. Before we get into the heavy lifting, if you like this content, please give a like and subscribe to our channel. And remember, there's a video version available on our YouTube page if you feel like watching instead of just listening.
That's right, Soul Fam. We truly appreciate you watching, listening, and commenting.
All right, Max. So back to Nancy Wilson and the story of how she landed the gig with Rusty Bryant's Carolyn Club band. This is a masterclass in industrial readiness. She didn't just audition. No, she occupied the space until the infrastructure had no choice but to hire her.
It sounds just like Nancy Mello. So it's 1956. The Carolyn Club in Columbus, Ohio, was the regional headquarters for hard-swinging jazz and R&B.
Royal G. Rusty Bryant was the king of the Columbus, Ohio tenor saxophonist and a band leader who was a local hero with a national reputation. And his band was a high-pressure machine.
Now, Nancy was only 19, Soul Fam, but she'd already spent years studying the Jimmy Scott clip and delay and the Dinah Washington diction that defined her singing. So she was ready and hungry to prove herself, and so she started showing up at the Carolyn Club. Not as a fan, but as a technical observer. Sounds just like Nancy. Mm-hmm. Night after night, she sat at the front row, Mello. But she wasn't just listening, she was mapping the room. She was learning Rusty's arrangements and finding the gaps in the brass where a song stylist could fit in.
Right, Max. Rusty Bryant was a high decibel player. He blew a big, greasy tenor sax.
Big, greasy, sloppy tenor sax. Nasty, greasy, that man.
That usually dominated the room. And Nancy was looking for that moment of opportunity.
But she was.
Well, finally, Rusty Bryant likely got tired of seeing the same poised young woman staring at his sax section.
Good, you think?
Yeah, he invited her up to sit in for a song. Now, here's the spot where the young architect stretches and flexes their muscle.
You think when he asked her up, he didn't think she was going to be able to sing, or he thought she was going to fight, right? So at the time, Rusty Bryant and his band were used to specific high-volume energy, you know? So Nancy brought this whole low-frequency power that the audience hadn't felt before. And most singers would have tried to shout to prove they could handle a big band. And that's, I'm guessing, what Rusty was expecting. But Nancy, she did the opposite. She used her dynamic minimalism. She sang with such surgical precision and cool authority that rowdy club went dead silent.
Yeah, the Carolyn Club was a loud room, Max. Clinking glasses, heavy brass, and a lot of smoke.
I've been in a lot of bars like that.
You're familiar with that. When Nancy started with that Jimmy Scott clip and delay, she forced the physics of the room to change. She sang so inside the beat and so quietly that the crowd had to physically stop moving just to hear the lyrics.
Well, Mello, Rusty Bryant wasn't just blown away by her voice. He was impressed by her ear.
Yes, he sure was, Max. Most singers at 19 struggle to stay in tune with a loud horn section.
They do.
But apparently not Nancy.
No, apparently not.
She was harmonizing with the saxophone textures as if she were a fifth horn in the line. And the story goes that just after one or two songs, the reaction from the crowd was so immediate.
Yeah, Mello, she was getting some of that Architects of Soul level of respect. All right, Nancy, you go, girl. Well, Rusty didn't even let her go back to the table. He supposedly turned to the band and then to Nancy and said, "You're not sitting anymore. You're part of the infrastructure." I mean, no, I doubt that he truly said you're part of the infrastructure. But I know he told her, "You're in and you're not leaving the stage."
That's right. And then Max, well, he offered the job right then and there because he realized she was the missing spec his band needed to go from a local jazz funk outfit to a sophisticated song-style powerhouse.
Yes, Mello. And this was where the 4-year apprenticeship really began, Mello. Thrust into the Chitlin Circuit reality. And remember, this is the 50s. Mm-hmm. This is the era of Big Maybelle and Dinah Washington, women who could knock a wall down with their lungs. So during her first few nights as a permanent member of the band, well, they were leaning into a heavy blues groove. So instead of trying to sing over Rusty's horn, Nancy's like, I ain't doing that. Nancy intentionally dropped her volume. This resulted in Rusty realizing that he was burying the lead. Oh, big mistake. He had actually had to signal the band to pull back their volume because Nancy had effectively rezoned the stage. I mean, it's official, Mello. She is a badass.
It's true, Max. She was. Promoters told her constantly, you're too thin, your voice is too light. You got to growl, girl. You got to shout so they can hear you over the beer bottles.
You such a little girl. Why don't you sing loud?
Right? But Nancy looked at the shouters and saw that many of them lost their voices by age 30. She saw the vocal nodes and the exhaustion.
Well, taking all that in, she made a strategic business decision because she wasn't going out like that. No. She's going to use her precision and her enunciation as her volume. And she told Rusty Bryant, I'm not going to compete with your horn section by screaming. I'm going to make your horn section quiet down so they can hear me.
And herein lies the lesson, Max.
That is some lesson, Mel.
Yeah, Nancy proved that a stylist doesn't follow the band follows the stylist.
Word.
Rusty reportedly told her, you're the only singer I've ever met who makes my horn sound like a background singer. Well, that was it, Max, and it's off we go.
That's the deal, Memo. Now starts the one-nighter grind. And, of course, everybody goes through it. They hit the road in a station wagon. Nancy was the foreman of her own brand, staying in separate boarding houses and maintaining her penthouse dignity while playing some of the grittiest rooms in the Midwest.
Forged by the fire of the stage and the club and the road, Nancy spent the next 4 years, which were 1956 to 60, as the apprentice on the road. This was the Chitlin Circuit grind that built her vocal infrastructure, even if she never wanted to be a Chitlin Circuit singer.
No, and she never wanted to be. But They were traveling in that station wagon, playing one-nighters across the Midwest. And Nancy was the only woman in a van full of hardened jazz musicians. She had to learn how to protect the brand in dive bars while maintaining the penthouse elegance she saw in her future. Brilliance. And by 1959, hey, Rusty knew she was too big for the club circuit.
And the end result was that by the time she left Rusty in 1960, she had 1,400 nights of job site experience.
That's some serious experience.
Yeah, she wasn't a newbie anymore. Rusty told her, you've got the technical specs, Nancy. You don't need a band leader anymore. You need a manager. That's when she headed for the big time and set her sights on Capitol Tower in New York/Hollywood.
Yep, and when she hit that Capitol Tower, well, she was a battle-tested architect who knew exactly how to style a room under any condition. That's a heavy lesson for all the upcoming artists listening, because Nancy realized early on that categorization is a limitation. So, spending that 4 years as an apprentice with Rusty Bryant's Carolyn Club band in Ohio, she wasn't just learning to sing. She was learning how to protect her vocal instrument and her identity. Badass.
Just think about that, the backbone that takes, Max.
It does.
Especially back then.
Yeah, we talk about the 50s.
Yeah, she knew that if she shouted once, the industry would zone her into the Chitlin Circuit forever.
Yeah, and then she'd be done.
Exactly. So no way Miss Nancy was having that. By holding out, she forced the world to build a penthouse category just for her.
Very Nancy Wilson.
And for us and for our peers today, don't let the algorithms or the labels define your zone. You define the building. The city council just has to deal with the view.
Yeah, she understood that the style wasn't just the dress or the hair. It was the architectural authority. And she was a master of her own zoning laws. So we're going to look at how that authority took her from the clubs in Ohio straight to the top of the Capitol Tower.
And on that note, we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
That's right. You're listening to Max and Mel's Architects of Soul. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Architects of Soul.
So, Mello, before we dip into the capitalist story, I think we should mention a couple more brilliant takeaways. And I use that phrase purposely from the architect that was Nancy Wilson. So Nancy worshipped Dinah Washington, which was season one, episode 8, y'all. right? The queen of the blues. But her brilliance was in what she didn't take from Dinah.
Yes, Max. She took Dinah's diction, the clear Queen's English delivery, but rejected the blues grit. Nancy realized that if she kept her vocal infrastructure clean, she could cross over into the Penthouse market that was usually reserved for white stars like Peggy Lee. She was not folding on that principle.
Oh, no, she was not. And at one time, a promoter actually tried to book her as a shouter to chase the trend. And she refused, man. She said, I don't shout, I style. And that truly was Nancy Wilson. All right, let's get into the next move on Nancy's journey.
Right, you are, Max. The general contractor responsible for this move was a man named John Levy, and a structural referral from the legendary George Shearing. Blind from birth, he grew up to be a fabulous jazz piano player, worth listening to if you love jazz.
Truly. And now the genesis of this happening, well, while she was doing this, while she was playing with Rusty's band. So while she was still apprenticing, he showed up and caught her set. Go figure.
Correct, Max. George was a master of cool jazz and sophisticated textures.
He was a phenomenal player.
Yeah, and since he was famously blind, this meant that he listened with a level of technical sensitivity that most critics missed.
Like a Ray Charles kind of thing?
Exactly. He didn't see
or Stevie Wonder kind of thing?
He couldn't see the gown,
nope.
But he heard the vocal architecture. He heard her clip and delay and her ability to harmonize with the horns.
That's right, Mello. Blown away, he immediately contacted his manager, John Levy, and he told him, John, there is a girl in Ohio you have got to hear. She isn't just a jazz singer, she's a stylist. She has the foundation to be a global brand, and, well, with Nancy's Jimmy Scott delay and her surgical diction, he realized that she was the perfect vocal component for the high-end jazz pop market.
Yes, Max. John Levy was a pioneer. A former bassist, he was one of the first black personal managers in the industry, representing giants like Cannonball Adderley and George Shearing.
Monumental names in music. I mean, two huge guys. So in 1959, Nancy decided to move to New York City, and she took a day job as a secretary at the New York Institute of Technology. But her after-hours mission was clear: track down John Levy.
Exactly, Max. Even though Levy had the referral, Nancy didn't wait for a phone call.
No.
She moved to New York and began the aggressive bidding phase of her career. Nancy tracked Levy down.
She was nothing if not thorough.
Right. And even when she finally got in front of him, she didn't lead with a demo tape. She led with a construction schedule.
It's true, Mello. She told him, George Shearing told you about me, right? I'm here working a day job at the New York Institute of Technology, but I'm giving you and myself 6 months to build this career. And if we haven't broken ground by then, well, I'm going back to Columbus. Well, Levy was blown away. He was like, I've had hundreds of singers chasing me, but I have never met an architect with that much industrial discipline.
He realized she wasn't just a voice, Max. She was a partner who understood the business of the building. Levy was impressed by her industrial discipline.
So he sent a demo to Capitol Records, the home of the Great American Songbook, Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole. Mm-hmm. And Levy didn't just send the tape to Capitol Records. He sent a product proposal. And within 5 weeks, hey, the home of the Giants were looking to sign her.
And John Levy became more than just a manager to her, Max. He became her general contractor. Interestingly, John Levy's blueprint for Nancy Wilson, professionalism, crossover appeal, and high-end branding, was very similar to what Berry Gordy would later do with the Supremes. Interesting string, Max.
It is an interesting string. It is. Yeah. It makes you wonder. But back to Nancy's journey. So Capitol Records A&R man Dave Kavanaugh heard the tape and recognized the missing spec in their roster. They needed a female counterpart to their sophisticated male crooners. Well, within 5 weeks of John Levy sending that tape, Nancy was signed to Capitol. And her debut album, Like in Love in 1960, was an immediate certificate of occupancy. It proved that a black woman could command the sophisticated pop market with the same architectural authority as the white stars of the era.
And in the early 1960s, as we said before, Capitol was the home of Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole.
Yep.
So when the new vibe of soul began to rise, Capitol didn't want the grit of Stax or the assembly line of Motown. They wanted an architectural upgrade.
Well, and they certainly got it. In their selection, Mello, they signed Nancy Wilson in 1960 and Lou Rawls shortly after that. And Capitol zoned them as the high-end alternative. They were marketed to the supper club crowd, the people who wanted soul music, but with the technical precision of a Broadway show or a jazz quintet. They were badass. Mm-hmm. And since both artists shared the same A&R legend, Dave Kavanaugh, well, he realized that if Nancy was the queen of the song style, what was Lou? Lou was the king of the urban monologue. Mm-hmm. And together, they formed a dual-tower infrastructure that dominated the adult contemporary and R&B charts simultaneously. They kicked some butt.
Indeed. Nancy and Lou were more than just label mates. They were structural peers. They often shared the same arrangers and the same clean music and sonic aesthetic. In the mid-'60s, it was not uncommon to see Nancy Wilson album and a Lou Rawls album sitting next to each other in the top 10. They proved that black excellence was a global commodity.
Yes, indeed, Mello. Both were masters of the live at the album. Nancy's The Great Show live at the Coconut Grove, and Lou Rawls live are blueprints for how to capture atmospheric soul. They used to joke that they were the Department of Sophistication at the Tower. And while the rock groups were tearing up the hotel rooms, Nancy and Lou were in the studio with a 40-piece orchestra styling the American Songbook.
And why does this matter to our peers today? Because Nancy and Lou taught us the longevity spec. They never chased a trend. When disco hit, they didn't pivot to four-on-the-floor beats. They stayed true to their classy soul foundation.
Of course, no, there was a shouter, Mello. I mean, they both used dynamic minimalism. Lou used his bass baritone like a cello, and Nancy used her clip and delay like a lead trumpet, and they were both early adopters of TV.
Right, Max. Nancy had her Emmy-winning show.
She did.
And Lou was a staple on every variety hour.
He was.
They knew that to be a pillar, you had to be visible across all platforms. So she and Lou Rawls became the twin pillars of the high-end department.
Yeah, Nancy was the female counterpart to Lou. Season 2, episode 10, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep, together they formed the high-end department of soul. While the world was looking at the teeny bopper tracks, Nancy was proving that sophistication is profitable. She had 3 albums on the charts at the same time in the mid-'60s. How badass is that?
Okay, and she proved that sophistication is profitable. She didn't have to dumb down her arrangements to reach the masses. She pulled the masses up to her level of excellence, and that leads us to the Cannonball Adderley string in 1961.
Oh, yeah. So John Levy, who, as we said before, managed both Nancy and Cannonball, well, he realized that the Capitol Tower, it needed a project that bridged the gap between the jazz aficionados and the R&B charts. And Levy didn't want a singer with a band. No, he wanted architectural fusion. What if I pair Nancy with Cannonball's legendary quintet, which included Joe Zawinul on piano, another amazing musician. And they decided that, well, okay, let's do that. We'll make 5 tracks. Nancy would be the lead instrument on those tracks. And on the other 6, Cannonball's band would play the instrumentals. And, you know, that will keep the technical credibility of the jazz fans intact while still introducing them to Nancy's style.
And if you don't know who Cannonball Adderley was, he was a horn player who played with Miles Davis.
Oh, and he was a killer.
Yeah, he was a heavyweight architect who didn't suffer fools. He was used to the highest level of musicianship.
Way too true, Mello. I mean, when you play on Miles Davis's kind of Blue album, well, that kind of says it all if you ask me. So, and his solo is so incredible. Every solo on that record, unbelievable. So Mello Cannonball was initially very wary of pop singers who might slow down the session. And he was like, I don't know. But Nancy walked into the booth, looked at the charts for Save Your Love for Me, and executed her clip and delay phrasing with so much rhythmic authority that the band was blown away. This is a technical landmark for every R&B soul artist today. When she stepped into that session, the Jazz Cats thought they'd have to teach her the charts. Well, Nancy walked in, read that shit once, and nailed it in one take. Cannonball told his band, stop playing like you're backing a singer and start playing like she's the lead trumpet. That's pretty easy for you to say.
That is the instrumental vocal blueprint, Max. She wasn't just fronting a band, she was weaving her voice into the brass.
Yeah, that's right. That's for our peers today. Learn your theory. Be a musician, not just a vocalist. When you speak the same language as the band, when your technical knowledge is the same, the structural integrity of the track goes through the freaking roof.
Yeah, they recorded most of her tracks in 1 or 2 takes. Cannonball was so impressed by her instrumental ear that he stopped treating her like a vocalist and started treating her like a lead alto sax.
Yeah, listen to the interplay on The Old Country. Nancy matches Cannonball's attack and decay so perfectly that it sounds like they're sharing the same set of lungs. And the album was a marketplace skyscraper. It was an immediate hit, peaking high on the Billboard Jazz and R&B charts, and it has not been out of print since 1961. Another amazing thing.
And the Save Your Love for Me string, Max, this track became Nancy's signature spec.
Sure did.
It proved that a black woman could be soulful without shouting and jazz without being inaccessible.
Sounds like cross-pollination to me, Mello. How about you?
Yep.
Well, this session gave Nancy the technical certification she needed to dominate the 1960s. It proved to the industry that she was a peer to the giants, not just a girl from Ohio with a nice voice.
She showed us that you don't have to compete with the instruments, you collaborate with them.
Yeah.
On Save Your Love for Me, she has the weight of a saxophone but the clarity of a bell, Max.
She certainly did, Mello. This album is the steel frame for every jazz soul record that followed.
Yes, her vocal on tracks like Save Your Love for Me, she didn't just sing over the band, she wove her voice into the brass. She pulled the audience up to her level of excellence rather than dumbing down her arrangements. She proved that the Penthouse has a huge market if the craftsmanship is there.
Yeah, just make sure you take the elevator to the top. And this album, as well as being the steel frame for every jazz soul record that followed, well, her technical lesson from this was that she showed the new Vibe peers how to be an instrumental architect, that her voice had the weight of a saxophone, that the clarity of a bell, and Nancy, well, she just wasn't an architect of soul. She was an architect of visual frequency. And speaking of frequency, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about that new medium for artists, television.
The new paradigm, Max. You're kicking it with Max and Mello's Architects of Soul, and we're chopping it up on the magnificent Nancy Wilson.
And we shall return. Thanks for tuning into Architects of Soul. Our music is waiting for you.
Hey, welcome back to Architects of Soul. And before we start this segment, if you like this content, please give a like and subscribe to our channel.
Please.
Please. And remember that there is a video version available on our YouTube page if you feel like watching instead of just listening.
Yes, Soul Fam, we would really appreciate it if you might leave us a comment. Let us know what you're thinking, learning, or creating. Okay, back to Nancy. So, Mello, most people think her TV career started at NBC in 1967, but we know that she actually laid that first brick, like we said in the first segment, in 1952, when at 15 years old, she won a talent contest in Columbus, Ohio, which, as we said in the top of the show, brought her our own 15-minute television show twice a week. Wow, that's so crazy. So while other soul architects were learning to work a crowded club, Nancy was working a lens. Man, she mastered the visual pocket, knowing how to look into a camera to create intimacy before she ever recorded a professional album. This gave her a 15-year head start on the technical specs of television, which nobody knew was going to be as big as it was back then.
No, and when she moved to the Capitol Tower, her manager, John Levy, realized that the song Stylist brand was perfect for the variety show era. But instead of chasing a show immediately, they booked her as a recurring guest on the biggest high-frequency shows of the time. The Ed Sullivan Show, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and The Andy Williams Show. Remember that one?
That's right, I sure do.
Yeah.
This would give her corporate validation, too. Nancy was safe, polished, and technically flawless. She proved to the network general contractors that a black woman could command the living rooms of middle America without the grit that made the 1960s executives nervous. She was the Penthouse standard of black excellence. She was amazing.
So by 1967, Nancy Wilson was a global brand with a string of hit albums. NBC realized that they needed a sophisticated crossover personality to compete in the variety show building boom live TV had brought to a new and huge audience.
And the network sure as hell didn't want a soul review. No. They wanted a high-end orchestrated variety hour. Nancy was the only architect with the technical specs to pull it off. And the result, Mello, well, the Nancy Wilson Show debuted as a mid-season replacement. It was so well constructed, and her visual frequency was so high that she won the Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement in its very first season.
Now, this is an anecdote for the modern era, Max.
Yes, it's a huge atomic anecdote for the modern era, Mello. But TV was still in the Wild West back then, so no one really was sure what was going to work. So specific different problems arose, especially with Nancy's show.
Indeed, they did, Max. Take lighting, for instance.
There's a big spot right there. Remember, you're in color now, right?
Right. So during filming, the lighting techs who were used to lighting white stars were washing her out on the cameras of that time. Nancy wasn't having it.
No, the color matching for a black person as opposed to a white person
more
is
obviously more complicated.
Yeah.
So she halted the entire production, and she brought in her own lighting consultant to find the warm frequency that highlighted her elegance.
That's right, and that's a massive business lesson because she realized that the visual architecture is just as important as the sonic side. So if the lighting is off, the brand is off. She wasn't being a diva; she was being a foreman. She won that Emmy because she looked like a queen. And she looked like a queen because she understood that technical specs of the medium. Because if you're on the box and you don't look good, well, let's just say it don't look good.
No doubt, Max. To the upcoming artists today, your visual brand, your videos, your socials, that's not secondary. That is the facade of your skyscraper. Nancy Wilson taught us to humanize the soul experience by controlling how the world sees us. She used television as a power tool to amplify her brand into households that hadn't yet felt that soul fire.
Yes, she was blazing a brand new trail as the TV shows were trying to market what were hopefully great ideas. You know, Nat King Cole's show, Dean Martin's variety show, Danny Kaye's show, Andy Williams, Judy Garland, which Nancy keyed into. Judy's show was high drama, structural intensity. It was built on the torch song and the massive vocal swell.
And while Judy was about the heartbreak, Max,
She certainly was about the heartbreak.
She was, but Nancy was about the cool. Nancy watched Judy's show and realized that Judy's foundation was often unstable because of the emotional toll. Nancy decided that her building would be earthquake-proof, steady, sophisticated, and technically perfect.
It's so interesting, Mello. You got to look at the TV skyline in '67. So you had Sammy Davis building a carnival. You had Dean Martin building a party, which is not unusual. And then you had Nancy Wilson building a diamond-encrusted skyscraper. And Judy Garland once famously said of Nancy, "That girl is so polished, she makes me look like a messy amateur." I mean, it was a nod to Nancy's industrial discipline, that.
Yeah, it was the battle of the architects, Max. Everyone was fighting for that prime time real estate. And Nancy won because she didn't try to outshout them. She just outstyled them into submission.
Exactly, Mel. She took the blueprint Nat King Cole started and added that Capitol Tower polish. She proved that a black woman could be the general contractor of a national audience.
And that's the peer lesson for the new vibe. Know the neighborhood.
Word.
Nancy Wilson knew who her neighbors were, Dean, Andy, Sammy, and she made sure her building had the most sophisticated curb appeal on the block. She was truly an architect built on discipline, which she was in total control.
And I mean that, man. She was a total badass. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to stamp the ticket on Nancy Wilson.
That's right. You're listening to Max and Mello's Architects of Soul, and we'll be right back.
And you're back with Max and Mello's Architects of Soul. So Mello, if we're pulling the final brick in the Nancy Wilson episode, what's the peer lessons for the Architects of Soul?
Well, Max, it's about a standard of excellence. Nancy showed us that class is a frequency.
It certainly is. It certainly is. It certainly is.
She didn't follow the zoning laws of her time. She just rewrote them. She proved that you could be soulful and surgical at the exact same time.
Exactly, Mello. She was the woman who looked at the Capitol Tower and said, I'll take the top floor. And she taught every new vibe artist that if you master your clip and delay, the whole world will slow down just to hear you breathe.
That's the Soulfire legacy right there, Max. Build for the skyline, but keep the foundation solid. Nancy Wilson didn't just sing songs. She styled an era.
Okay, Mello, so precision is a power move. Nancy taught the new vibe that soul isn't always about how much you can give. It's about how much you can control, which is why her controlled burn is the blueprint for sophistication. It's about being so accurate that the audience has to meet you where you are. I just can't believe what a badass she was.
She really was. Nancy Wilson proved that an architect doesn't have to follow the zoning laws of the industry, Max. She built her own category. She protected her visual frequency and mastered the physics of the microphone.
She sure damn well did, Mello. She showed us that you can be cool and still have grit. And for every upcoming artist, remember that your craft is your foundation. Don't chase the shout if your soul is in the whisper. Nancy Wilson is the standard of sophisticated excellence. I was lucky to have worked with her, her band, and her wonderful musical director and piano player at the time, Nathan Heathman, back in the day at the Apollo Theater. There was always magic in the air when the music filled the room, and I got to see it all: regal beauty, sophistication, wonderful timbre, and a truly dynamic band. And tight, they were so tight. Nathan, who gratefully sat down with me at the piano and spent some time showing me some passing chords and helping better my songwriting and my music. What a magical moment that was, Mello. Sitting on the Apollo stage, two people on a piano stool, playing a grand piano in the middle of that theater, learning music. How do you beat that? It was an honor to mix her and feel the architect honor the music so incredibly, and she did.
Oh yeah, I would bet that was some feeling, Max. The history, the beauty of the music, and the magnificence of the architect, and summing up the architectural legacy of Nancy Wilson for our Architects of Soul listeners, we're talking about a woman who didn't just inhabit the music industry, she owned the air rights to it.
She was absolutely magnificent. She was the general contractor of sophistication. She was as smooth as anything. She proved that you could build a skyscraper of soul without using a single shot or a scream. She used precision engineering to move from a smoky club in Ohio to a penthouse in the Capitol Tower. And as always, we want to close with our final thought, and I hope for all of us, our art, our craft, and our creations.
Keep that soul fire burning, protect your sound, nurture your creativity, own your voice, and remember the lessons from the giants who came before.
And yes, protect your masters and seek out wise mentors who can guide you on your journey. And until next we meet, peace and soul, y'all.